Oh, they're recording it.
So, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Institute of Health and Social Care Management's latest in its very, very popular HealthChat series. This evening's event has really been inspired by our military special interest group who wanted to find the main man, the head honcho, to come and talk to us all about military health and social care activity. And we've got the absolute main man. We've got Peter Homa, who is the Director General for the Defence Medical Services. Peter was appointed in August 2019, I think, Peter. Prior to that, an absolutely stellar career in chief executive positions with the NHS. And frankly, the Defence Medical Services are very lucky to have him. We, needless to say, have Roy Lilly as our chair this evening. Do please sit back.
Roy
and
Lilly,
enjoy.
and that's
If you'd
John
be generous
Wilkins.
enough to mute yourself if you're watching this as a member of the audience, that would be much appreciated. But for now, I'm going to hand on to Roy and Peter, and enjoy. Thank you.
John, thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. If you're watching us live, well, if you've got a comment, you can put it in the little chat thing at the bottom. I don't need to tell you how to use Zoom now, because we all know how to do that after 2 years using it. Or if you've got a question, we'll leave some time for questions, excuse me, at the end. So don't be shy. Don't press leave and then think, you know what, I really wish I'd asked that question, because, you know, if you've got a question, we want to hear it. And Peter, good evening.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Nice to be here.
It's very nice. Where are you in the country? Are you on some far-flung military camp in Barbados, or?
No, I'm in rural Leicestershire, having just returned from London.
Oh, right.
It's where we live.
Well, it's fine. I was just hoping for a bit more excitement than that. Anyway, listen, it's great to see you. And look, there's two audiences really, I think, tonight. First is, of course, we've got a lot of your military colleagues who won't know about your NHS experience probably. And we've got a lot of NHS people who won't understand about what you do in the military. So I thought we'd kind of split the discussion into two bits and go back. I mean, you and I first came across each other, I think, was during the Thatcher reforms, when all the trusts went from being district health authorities and district general hospitals into being trusts. I think I came across you in Germany. I think it was Berlin, extraordinarily, because it was at the Golden Helix Award. And I can't remember what year it was, but it's a long time ago now. It must have been 1827 or something. But it was a long time ago. But you'd come up with, or your people had come up with, what they call the one-stop breast cancer clinic, which, of course, at the time was extraordinarily innovative. But now, of course, these days we take it for granted. But that, I think that, I'm all right, that was when we first crossed paths.
Yes, it certainly was, Roy. It was in response to the Golden Helix Award, an annual award, and we'd developed a number of single visit clinics, exactly as you describe. And the idea, of course, came from the front line. And what we did, and Brian Edwards, who was then the Trent Regional General Manager, established a community of interest of individuals who worked in healthcare organisations that could really push the boundaries in terms of quality and efficiency. And what we did through the single visit clinic is not only did we give patients a much better experience by providing in a single visit all the diagnostic and the treatment plan agreements that would take several weeks. It also improved the teaching opportunities for students, and it saved us some money. And we didn't lose the medical records, which we often did when we had multiple attendances by patients. Of course, patients didn't have to fight their way in to find somewhere to park on loads of occasions either. So it was a much more convenient thing. But we got the idea from listening to our staff and indeed listening to our patients. And one of the best pieces of advice I was given at that stage in my career was by a fantastic outpatient sister called Jackie Wright. And Jackie had attended a talk I gave when I was trying to say how efficient Leicester Royal Infirmary was. And she said, "You think you're efficient, you follow a patient." And so I did, and I was absolutely appalled at the inconvenience that we created for patients and how often staff had to overcome some of the screw-ups we as an organization have put into place. So sorry, a long answer to your question.
No, but it's an interesting answer, isn't it? Because it leads us into several areas. I mean, firstly, start with a patient and work backwards, which is something I've been banging on about for years. And the other thing is creating the environment for innovation. I mean, you've been in the NHS. Oh, I should say as a historical note, Brian Edwards, Professor Brian Edwards, I don't know if he's watching tonight, but if you are, it's good to see you. Brian is now covering the blood inquiry for me, and he reports regularly. It's a really interesting inquiry, and one wonders really what the upshot of it's going to be. It won't be good for a lot of people, I think. We don't come out of it with a great deal of well, I don't know. We haven't covered ourselves in glory. Let's put it that way. The way that was dealt with. Anyway, so back to innovation. I mean, you're in a big organisation now. You know the MOD. I don't know if it's any better or any worse than the NHS, but getting innovation into organisations is a real knack, isn't it? And you know, so the genesis really was listening to the patient. But what about this sort of the clinical resistance that there often is to innovation? And you know, because I remember when we started these one-step clinics, there was a lot of clinical pushback. People saying, "Oh, you're going to do it in a rush, and it's going to work, and we're going to miss things." You have to kind of create a confidence in people to take innovations forward.
Yeah, absolutely, Roy, and I'm personally very respectful of caution in terms of, is this going to create harm? And that's the big concern, obviously, which is why I think adopting a proven methodology, and crudely speaking, and it's a gross simplification, but the plan, do, study, act cycle, and it's been refined in all sorts of really powerful, sophisticated ways. But having a methodology where one trials something against existing baselines, measures the impact to see if it's moving things in the right direction, if not, either stop or adjust, and do that with agility. But the key thing, in my experience, is creating an environment within which the great ideas which reside in every organization, whether it's the NHS, the military, or wherever, actually can breathe the oxygen of successful attention and support. There are a number of examples in the military which I've had the privilege of learning about, but the notion of failing fast. So if you pursue something, it doesn't work, then you stop. Either reconstitute what you're doing, or you stop the exercise and do something different. And having evidence, so that one then, going back to your question, one then has evidence to present to those that were doubtful or were dismissive. And in my experience, providing the evidence is authentic and can be presented in a compelling way, the majority, not all, the majority will then move in the right direction. But inevitably, selling change is a process, not an event. And very often we assume it's an event.
Yeah, and really interestingly, I mean, during COVID, we've seen an enormous amount of change for the better, fundamentally because management really just kept out of it. A lot of managers were putting on PPE and shoving stuff around on trolleys and delivering things, and they had a completely different job. I know there was one trust that pretty much shut down its finance department, and they all started working as porters and what have you. But I mean, the interesting thing there was that the frontline were faced with a whole load of stuff that didn't work when the organization was under such pressure. And they just said, bugger it, we're not going to do it. We're going to do something else. And it worked, and it stuck. I mean, we did have in the NHS, we did have a really bright bloke called Matthew Gould, who's the head of NHSX, I think, and I mean, he's become a bit of a hero during COVID because he was head of the digital bit, and he wrote to everybody and said, forget GDPR and the digital rules and all that. If you need to share data, share it sensibly, do no harm, as you've just said, and be sensible and get on with it. And people were. And we at the Academy of Fabulous Stuff now, we're running a whole thing on no going back, where people have changed stuff and they say, this is so good, we don't want to stop doing that.
Absolutely. And the amongst the many challenges as we work our way through COVID is holding on to that sense of energy and enterprise, and avoiding the entropy that large complex organizations often unwittingly create. And that's a big challenge.
Yeah, I'd say leaders, the leader has one job: to create the time and space for good people to do great things. And you know what? It works. I mean, I've been talking about this for years and years and years. All of a sudden, during COVID, I found out that I've been speaking the truth. It actually worked. I was very surprised. So then of course, you moved from there. You went up to Nottingham. Well, you did a stint at the CQC, didn't you? I mean, I can't bear the CQC, as you know. I mean, I think inspection has got absolutely no place in quality, but it's a very different organization now. When you started it out, it was a much more of a learning organization, wasn't it? It followed the Bristol baby debacle.
Well, it was certainly around that time, right? It was the Commission for Health Improvement, CHI, as it was called in those days. And I think it's fair to say it broke the ice on NHS reviews, as we called them in those days, inspections as we'd called them now, and it covered England and Wales. And we completed reviews, clinical governance reviews, as they were called, of pretty well all the NHS organisations across England and Wales. And the emphasis, and it was during the time, as you say, just after the Bristol awful tragedies, and the emphasis was very much on sharing good practice, as well as completing clinical governance reviews, which had just been formulated, in addition to doing national studies and completing an annual State of the NHS report, which continues. And over time, I think the government has wanted to create a more Ofsted-like, and now I think Ofsted and CQC are very, very similar, using the same nomenclature and all the rest of it. And so it started in a very different place to where it is now. Yeah,
I mean, the original concept was sharing best practice, and I remember people were queuing up to come. I think, am I right in saying they were seconded to you for a while?
We really liked the model. We had a core staff, of course, of individuals that ran the review teams, and then we would have clinicians from all sorts of disciplines, managers and patients. Citizen representatives form part of the team in order to provide a rounded perspective. And one of the big challenges internationally of healthcare inspectors, and it's true of other areas of inspection, is consistent and reliable inspection. So if a different team goes in the same place, do they get the same results? Inter-rater reliability, as it's called in the trade, and we did a good deal to try and achieve that. I'm sure we could have done more in retrospect, Roy, but the whole emphasis was on helping to shift the average distribution curve to the right in a positive way.
Yeah, move the box up the graph. Listen, I think they've lost their way, but that's a conversation for another day. And of course, the other big landing point in your career was at Nottingham, wasn't it? You rang Nottingham.
Yeah, I've had the privilege of serving there for 12 years. Where I joined with the fabulous chairman, Peter Barrett, and we were both appointed to help with the merger of City Hospital and Queen's Medical Centre. And the early years were really, really tough, as mergers are. And it was an absolute joy and privilege to do that job. And it was really tough to leave, but the time had come for me to leave. And I felt like I was leaving the family rather than leaving an organisation.
Yeah, well, I spent some time up there with Peter, with Keynes. What's his name? First name? I can't remember. Eric Keynes. That's a good old Eric Keynes, Professor Eric Keynes. We set up the Health Services Management School there, and academia is not for me, as you probably realise. So I just, did some of the early spade work. But so what was it like running a university hospital? What's the interface with the university really like?
I always really enjoyed it, Roy. In that and I've been responsible for 3 university teaching trusts in my career. The important thing is that academic input and NHS healthcare delivery should blend together. And so the NHS is far, far stronger as a result of having an academic presence, because it means that we've got individuals either at the leading edge or close to the leading edge of their field, and they can then bring that expertise into the care of NHS patients. And it means we have the benefit of fresh blood students and other members of the academia, as well as the NHS come through. So it has a real electricity and vibrancy, which has real benefits. And I saw that in Leicester, which was one of Nottingham, where the quality of healthcare improved enormously as a consequence of the medical school. And that wasn't because the NHS folk before the universities arrived weren't doing a great job, but it brought extra resources, extra expertise, and also a centre of gravity in terms of being able to draw upon best practice from across the world.
Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, and then I've got it. I'm out of sync there with that, but it's interesting nonetheless. And then you went off and you do the job that you do now. Okay, tell us, what is the job that you do now?
The easiest way to describe it is it's analogous to being a chief exec of the provision of healthcare to all the armed services for the UK across the world.
Okay, across the world, and you're a civilian.
Yep.
And is your staff civilian, or are they drawn from the military?
It's 50-50, 50% military crudely and 50% civilian. I'm the first civilian non-doctor to fulfill the role. I often reflect, Roy and colleagues on the line, I wish I'd had this experience earlier in my career, because I would have been a better NHS manager.
Yeah.
Learned so much from our military colleagues and our civilian colleagues in the MOD. And I only hope I have been able to offer something in return. But to learn different ways of attacking common problems is enormously invaluable and important.
It is interesting because the NHS now has got a general, I think it's a general messenger who's doing a report on NHS management and leadership. I mean, for a start, that seems to me to be a mess, because management and leadership are two different things. I mean, there's a blurred boundary between the two sometimes, but fundamentally management is management, leadership is leadership. So I don't know what he's going to come up with. But as someone who's seen it from both sides of the fence, should we be more like the military in the NHS?
Well, I've got a huge amount of time and respect for Gordon Messenger, and I'm sure that his report's going to be valuable, Roy. I think there are exquisite strengths in both organisations, and if we could combine them, gosh, that would be powerful. Because the NHS, there are more similarities between the two organisations than there are differences, and the similarities include, fantastic staff who go above and beyond the call of duty so often, and want to do the right thing for patients or serving personnel. So that's a very, very common bond. The military are absolutely superb at responding to crisis, as we've seen. And I am in awe and deep respect of what I've seen that the military teams have done, and have learned a huge amount from them, having been in Silver and Gold Command in my career when we've dealt with some crisis or other. And I wish I'd had the experience that I've had the past few years. I think I would have done a better job, to be frank. And the military also have a much better approach to talent management, in that they map out an individual's career, obviously in close discussion with the individual, in a much more thoughtful way than I ever encountered in the NHS. And they do it at the level of the service, not the level of the institution. And of course, the NHS has a whole set of other benefits. It's more empowering financially than the military, and it means that decisions can be taken, even though it may not feel it at the time, faster and closer to the front line and the patient than is usually the case in the military. There's more, I think, flexibility within the NHS. And one of the things I observed very early in my times in the military is, in the military, for understandable reasons, because the chain of command, there's a much higher deference to grade and to rank. In the NHS, and I'm sure it's true for all on the line, for those who are from the NHS, I was used to being held to account by everyone, the patient, the porter, the doctor, the nurse, as well as the board, and I've enjoyed that. In the military, one has to create an environment within which that is seen to be acceptable, because it isn't a default setting.
That's really interesting. And when it comes, I mean, you've got people all over the world. I mean, I imagine COVID was a bit of a challenge, was it?
It was huge. We invested thousands of our people into the NHS, and absolutely delighted to do that. And the feedback we've had from NHS colleagues, as well as from MOD colleagues, is really positive.
But it must have been a stretch, because you've got to look after your own people as well. I mean, if you think about it, there's fewer soldiers, I think, than there is at a decent turnout at Liverpool Football Club and for a home game. You know, we don't have that many soldiers, do we?
That's not correct, Roy. But you're right in the point that that we had concurrently to look after those around the world, not only to look after them in terms of the operations they were on and the exercises, but also to make sure they were serviced as far as COVID was concerned.
Well, that was really my point. I mean, did you have to stop doing stuff because of COVID? Or I mean, you can't really do social distancing in military training, can you?
No, but there were some aspects where we did adopt that. For example, training medics, we adopted particular approaches and methods to safeguard the well-being of those people that were being trained, as well as those who were training them. But we had to slow down or stop some of our activities so that we could redeploy, exactly as the NHS did. We could redeploy our people to the COVID fight, so to speak.
Yeah, and is that is part of your job, the deployment of people within your organization?
Yeah, so that our job is to support the 3 single services, do the operations that they are tasked to do wherever it is around the world, and that encompasses everything from workforce through to technology, to very, very importantly having the right personnel in the right place at the right time.
Talk to us about training. I mean, how do you take young men and women into the services as junior doctors and have them train, or how do you train the next generation? How do you do that?
Doctors, nurses, and they're trained in universities in the same way that they are, of course, for civilians. And so there's a card. We also welcome those who are already qualified to come in to join us. And it is what I've learned is for those who are so minded, it's absolutely fantastic career, offering a wealth of experience, sometimes around the world. The downside, of course, is that a number of our colleagues have, during the course of their career, they will have moved 15, 16 times. It's one incredible imposition on the family, and some families are completely at one with that, but it won't suit everyone.
No, I can imagine it won't. And what about reservists? Let's get some numbers on this. You've got about 1,200 staff, have you?
We've got about 5,000 staff.
5,000 staff. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so you've got 5,000 staff. You've got a budget of what? 300 million?
It's about 500 million.
500's gone up. Okay, 500 million. And actually, that's not really a very big budget when you compare it to NHS budgets, is it?
Bear in mind, Roy, that a number of the clinical personnel will be paid for, if you will, by the 3 single services, Army, Navy, and Air Force.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you. I mean, whose balance sheet do they come on? If you got like a surgeon from the Royal Navy, is he still paid for by the Navy, or wherever he comes from? Where she comes from?
That's right. We've got a different set of arrangements depending on whether they're our staff, whether the Army, Navy, and Air Force. Yeah. And we've got a particular approach called Unified Career Management at the moment, which will go live in the middle of this year, which will move the career development of DMS or clinicians, irrespective of their single service, into a single team. And the objective there is to provide even richer professional experience for the doctors, nurses, allied health professionals and others, but also mean we can respond more quickly to the defence requirements around the world.
Yes, and I think you've got some of your people working in other hospitals around the world, haven't you?
Well, we've got, there are 5 hospitals in England where we've got particularly close relationships.
Yeah.
And that's where we have about 1,000 of our staff are located. And we do have some staff that have commitments in other hospitals, and certainly lots of primary care and dental practices across the world.
Yeah, I was at the George Washington, and I think I met some British military there who work. It was a few years ago now, but they were British military. So how does it work? So somebody, let's take your, you say, okay, I want a career in medicine in the military. Would you go through Sandhurst in a normal way, and when you come out of that, you'd go to medical school?
Or both, depending on what age that they joined. Both could occur. They'll then graduate. They'll then have a set of appointments, depending on which single service it is, which in many ways replicates the early training that a doctor in training would get in the NHS, and sometimes actually in the NHS. But the training that the military provide clinicians, doctors, nurses, allied health professionals is absolutely superb. It's a fantastic amount of experience that's provided, and obviously depending on if they're in a particular single service. If it's the Navy, for example, there's the Institute of Naval Medicine, which is one of the global leading experts in naval maritime medicine, and they'll benefit from all the expertise there, which provides them with a fantastic foundation upon which to build their career.
Yeah, I mean, if you take a surgeon, for example, or whatever they call a medic on a ship, I mean, you're pretty much on your own, aren't you? In life on land, you can call other people in, but if you're in the middle of the ocean in a tin can, you're on your own.
Well, it's not quite like that, Roy.
You use telemedicine and stuff like that.
It's a combination. Well, firstly, the guys, irrespective of where they are, whether it's in the Air Force, the Army, or the Navy, have to develop exquisite skills, whatever their particular discipline is, so that they can provide first-line intervention, diagnosis and intervention to the best standard possible. But in each of those domains, Army, Navy, and Air Force, we have a set of mechanisms so they can reach back, as we would say, to England or another centre of expertise to get an expert opinion to help guide the clinician in caring for whatever the casualty's requirements are. And then, if necessary, we can evacuate the patient, depending on where it is that they are, back to the UK or back to a hospital that we recognise as being a centre of expertise. So it's not as if the clinicians are left on their own, but they do have that exquisite responsibility of looking after someone maybe thousands of miles away from a hospital, but we do have those lines of communication. Yeah. There's a whole set of very clever technology that assists surgeons as well as physicians in diagnosis.
I remember going to Kosovo and watching what they did there, and because it was a long time ago now, they had a CompuServe email account and used to take digital pictures of x-rays and send them around the world to get out. And of course, I suppose the thing that we're most conscious of was Afghanistan in more recent years, and how they managed casualties there.
Yeah, and the tragedies in Afghanistan, in terms of the dreadful injuries that occurred, really enabled the most extraordinary amount of learning to take place, and it has enabled the major trauma center and all the networks in the NHS adopt so many of the practices that were trialed and proven in Camp Bastion. And Tim Hodges, Major General Tim Hodges, who's the Surgeon General, who's a very senior member of the Defence Medical Services, spent a great deal of time in Camp Bastion, and with his team led a lot of pioneering work in terms of saving life. And that has then been rolled out in a very impressive way across many areas of the NHS. And which is why I think having reservists from the NHS working in the military, gaining experience and bringing that experience into the military, and then taking the military experience back to the NHS is enormously valuable, both professionally and personally.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about reservists because that is a terrific opportunity, isn't it, for people to get experience on both camps, as it were. Come and be a reserve. How many do you take a year? Do you have like vacancies for that, or
we are
limited numbers?
We always welcome reservists, Roy, in clinical and indeed non-clinical roles. And it is exactly as you describe. It provides a really valuable set of different experiences and training. Again, we had quite a number of reservists in Nottingham. And as a trust, we benefited enormously from the professional and personal growth that those reservists brought back into the organisation when they came back from operations. And most recently, of course, it was Afghanistan, but also there are other operations and exercises that are routinely run. And
of course, it's not just the medics. You've got nurses as well. Queen Alexandra, is that still current?
That's one of.
Do you recruit to that unqualified people? You recruit and they have do their nurse training 3 years through the QA.
Well, we run through nursing school in Birmingham University and indeed in association with other centres providing experience for nurses. And they can join that particular cadre. So the Defence Medical Services provides a wealth of training, literally from undergraduate through to postgraduate, where that's appropriate, for combat medical technicians. And what we found is that the combat medical technicians, and these are the men and women that will be at the front line and will provide first encounter assistance to someone that's been injured. They provided enormously valued service to the NHS, and indeed our friends in Derby and Burton NHS Trust have recently opened their doors to a new cadre of combat medical technicians, and the feedback from the trust and the feedback from our guys is absolutely brilliant, in that our guys were able to support the clinicians in the hospital, look after the patients, and our guys gained a huge amount of additional clinical experience. So I'd really encourage those that are in a position to open their doors, if they aren't already, to the reservists and to our guys spending time with NHS colleagues.
And who pays for a doctor going through university would have to pay, and nurses pay. Does the military pick up the tab?
Yeah, it does, and there's a period of duty that is expected to be provided in response to that, Roy. And for the people from the military clinicians that spend time in the NHS pays for that time.
So like a golden handcuff
sort of thing.
Yeah. How long?
I can't remember offhand, Roy, but it's different for different professions.
I see. What about normally we go from house officer and then senior house officer, registrar, consultant. Do you have that same progression, or is it done through? Is it a rank thing? How does it work?
It's a stepwise process, but it reflects the military structure of the three individual single services, depending on which single service the doctor or nurse joins. So they would join in a very junior capacity, and then typically would work their way up, just as a nurse might, or a doctor might, or indeed a scientist might, a physio might. So there's a well-defined career path in exactly the same way as there is for the NHS, Roy.
I see. So could you have a non-commissioned officer as a surgeon?
It's extremely unlikely, because one would expect, but that's not to say that a non-commissioned officer couldn't become a surgeon, providing he or she went through the necessary training. Yeah. And as you'll know, and others will know on the line, there are many brilliant examples of NCOs becoming officers, but they would need to complete the necessary training, of course.
Yeah, I was quite familiar with Sandhurst, really, because when I lived in that neck of the woods, I was the mayor for a bit of Sandhurst. Sandhurst straddles two local authority areas, which is bloody inconvenient. But so I used to go in there quite a lot. And I thought the men and women who'd gone through the Sandhurst training were extraordinary caliber. They really were. And they were totally focused on the fact they had to look after their people. That was the one big theme that came out of this. What did they learn about leadership? They learned they were nothing without the people who they were going to lead. That really, I don't know. I suppose it was the first time I'd actually seen that, and people had talked about it in those terms.
Absolutely, Roy, and the military invest very serious effort in training and developing that capability for exactly the reasons.
And I guess Cranmore does, and Dartmouth as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for the other services. You talked about the family, Peter. How do you look after the family? They're shipped around the world. I mean, do you look after them as well?
For those families that are overseas, we do. For those that are in England or in the UK, they'll be looked after by the NHS. And having said that, there's a very exciting development which we're working on with our NHS friends called the Catterick Integrated Care Centre, CICC, which is in essence where we're looking at providing a single facility that will look after both military and civilian residents. And that's going to be a really important, almost proof of concept, Roy, to see if we can further integrate our services.
Yeah, it is important. I mean, again, I'm going back in my time, I was a governor of a school in near one of your places. I won't say which one, but we had big problems with getting the families sorting out with the GP, because the GPs were all chock-a-block anyway, and there was such a lot of churn with the families coming and going that it was really difficult to get them sorted out with the GP. Yeah,
that's something that I hope we've made some considerable progress on, but there's much more I'm sure we can do. And this isn't the entire answer at all, but information is, well, you'll know that information systems are really important. So we've got systems that talk between the military and the NHS.
Yeah.
And we're in the process of implementing a system called Cortisone, that's its working title, which will vastly improve the interoperability between the Defence Medical Services and the NHS, which will assist, it won't completely resolve, but will assist many of the challenges that you refer to.
Yeah, so if you've got, say, a GP that's on System 1 or EMIS or something, can you connect into that?
Most usually we can, but it's a bit clunky.
Yeah, it is. I mean, listen, interoperability, if you find out how to do that, let us know, will you? We'll send the NHS around and pay you a few quid to learn, because interoperability, I've never seen us ever be able to do. So, okay, so you've got these people all around the world. You've got a hugely highly qualified staff. What happens, when you get something like we've just had with COVID, and we say the military are going to help us? I mean, especially you probably watch that on the telly and think, oh God, not again. But you have been our first port of call, haven't you? Really through COVID, enormous amount.
Certainly, Defence Medical Services provided a very, very important part of the military response to COVID.
Because it's a logistical thing, isn't it? It's not just to say, well, we'll have 70 people from the Army or the military, Navy or whatever. They've got to live somewhere. You've got to feed them. You've got to brief them. They've got to do the job. It must be a huge logistical exercise. Do you do all that?
We do some of that, certainly. We have medical logisticians, and the military do logistics, as you say, superbly well.
Yeah.
So that's again something that I've learned and wish I had had that experience earlier in my career. But the Defence Medical Services were one important part of a whole set of support provided from across the military. And so when the government indicated he wanted some military assistance, the Chief of the Defence Staff and the Permanent Under Secretary tasked a group of individuals to work with Department of Health and Social Care and NHS colleagues to work out what would be most useful, how could we deploy that, and that then led to the sequence of interventions that we then participated in, them most of us saw on the television as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, funny to say it, because I'm where I'm now, I'm not far from the Excel Centre, and I covered a bit of it with ITN, and we went there, and the military were there, making a huge contribution of turning this huge cavernous exhibition centre into a hospital. I think they did it in 2 weeks.
I think it was even shorter than that, Roy. It was absolutely breathtaking, and having met a number of the military and indeed non-military colleagues who were involved in that, one can only admire and respect what they did. And what it did inevitably, crisis bring individuals together, and it really helped to create what already was a very strong bond between NHS and military brothers and sisters, an even stronger bond, which endures, which is great.
Well, talk about bringing people together. I think Mark Bricknell was involved in that, because you'll remember Mark from your NHS days. He's now some big honcho at KPMG, and he earns £375 million a minute doing his job. Whatever it is. He's in Bermuda at the moment, so he won't be watching. But it certainly has brought us together. So what happens now, Peter? What are you changing, working on? What are your problems, and what are you doing to fix them?
Right. Well, we've got, as you'd expect, Ryan, many of the same challenges that our NHS colleagues.
Well, have you got staffing problems? Because we got horrendous staffing problems.
Well, I was going to say that the first of those, workforce, and you'll know, not least from Mark Bricknell's book, Human, which is a great study across the world in terms of the shortage internationally of clinicians.
It's a horrendous book to read, isn't it? I mean, you look at it and you just completely despair. Mind you, anybody who wants to buy Mark's book, it's worth buying, but you do need a pair of glasses to read it. It's in that little tiny print. Now, maybe that's because I'm getting old, but it's in 8-point or something.
Well, I know I'm wearing glasses and you aren't, Roy. So, and the other aspect, which I think is honourable, is that all the proceeds from the sale of the book go to the prostate charity. No, he's done really well. We tease him about it, but it's a really important book, because it was the first, I think, proper analysis of the global shortage of clinical workforce. And if you look at it, you think, well, what the hell are we going to do? And the NHS still doesn't have a workforce plan. So
to lure you into the politics of the NHS, but I mean, we don't have a workforce plan. Do you have a workforce plan?
We do. The real challenge is making it live, making it happen, because of the shortage of personnel. It slightly rephrases a phrase that a scientist used in the 1950s, when the scientist said, "Now there's no more money, it's time to think." Now there's no more workforce, it's time for us to think. What we can't do is assume that fewer and fewer staff can deliver the same care in the same way to the same standard. Otherwise, we will completely crush the goodwill of the staff. And so, to answer your question in terms of what are we doing these days, very, very similar challenges to the NHS, inevitably, because we're delivering healthcare. And so what we're doing is we've got at least two major challenges, Roy. One is exactly the same as the NHS, recovering the huge amount of work that we either stopped or had to slow down. In our world, it's making sure that our serving personnel are deployable, i.e. they have all the vaccinations, all the health checks, audiology checks, dentistry checks, so that they're fit to go out the door, as we would say, at a moment's notice. And inevitably through COVID, because we've had to redeploy people, we have lost some of that. The second is our transformation work, which is, I hope, our thoughtful response to all the challenges that we face, i.e. fewer people being available to take up clinical posts over the next 10 or so years. So what we're seeking to do there is to essentially redefine how we deliver patient care, where we deliver it, and who delivers it, which includes making sure we're using the wealth of expertise that clinicians, doctors, nurses, allied health professionals provide. And so we don't rely exclusively on doctors to provide some of the things they've traditionally provided, just as the NHS has done, as you mentioned in your opening remarks. We've got information systems, including the one I mentioned, Cortisone, but also using telemedicine, video consulting. And we're looking at what we call our medical estates rationalization program, which is essentially looking at, can we provide higher quality care, better staff satisfaction, better deployability, and better value for money from fewer places, but just as the NHS is bringing different clinical practices together. And finally, as part of our overall transformation work, a really exciting program of healthcare improvement, which modernizes many aspects of the way in which we look after serving personnel, including how we recruit, how we provide pharmacy. And when I look back, Roy, modestly, I think it's fair to say that the MOD, of Defence Medical Services transformation program in healthcare, is probably amongst the most challenging, ambitious of any that I'm aware of in the NHS. And I know there are a lot of really great programs. And with that, there's some risk. but there's great opportunity for us to do a really good job. And what we're trying to do, and we do it imperfectly, but we're trying to do is to listen to those that we serve and to listen to the voice of those who serve them.
Well, it's very important, isn't it? You touched on something that's really quite interesting, I think, and that's what we're doing now, Zoom. I mean, for years and years, I've been banging on. I mean, as long as you've known me, I think I've been banging on using technology, for things like consultations and whatever. Skype came in and the NHS studiously ignored it. FaceTime came in, the NHS studiously ignored it. Zoom came in, studiously ignored it. Then along came COVID, and suddenly there was this great scramble to see how much we could actually use with, I mean, it's not exactly telemedicine, but it's certainly to use video consultation. I imagine you use that a lot, do you?
Yeah, we do. The uptake was very rapid for the same reasons you described in the NHS, Roy, and we continue to use it, and that's part of the way in which we will achieve the sort of transformational work I described. Not the only way by any means, but it's a really important way. And of course, it's so much more convenient for patients, and it depends on their condition. Of course, it isn't right for all conditions. And we've learned a lot, sometimes through our mistakes, about how we can make the video consultation and telephone consultation work for all parties, patients and staff. And there's a lot that we've learned over the past period.
Yeah. Just thinking about the way in which you're integrated in Birmingham. Of course, when I was the chairman of the District Health Authority down in Frimley Park's neck of the woods, we subsumed the Cambridge Military Hospital in Aldershot into Frimley Park, which was one of the first times the military and the civilian two services have met. It was hugely controversial at the time, and it was a bloody awful row. But it settled down very well. And I remember my mum, when she was a frequent flyer at Frimley Park, she'd come back and she'd say, I said, how'd you get on, Mum? She was wonderful. Shit. I saw one of those soldiers. They're so much better than the other lot, which I thought, good old Mum, But they turn up, they look smart, and the nurses have got nurses' uniforms on, and they don't come, all bundled up in plastic like we expect the poor nurses in the NHS to work. So that's worked very well, hasn't it? What's happened with the rehabilitation that I think that's moved as well, hasn't it? Where people have been.
Well, firstly, just to comment on the hospitals, we have 5 major hospitals with whom we have a very, very close working relationship, including, of course, Frimley. Yeah. And it was a real privilege for me, I think it was last year, in response to the contribution that Frimley MOD, or Defence Medical Services, had made to looking after the local population through Frimley Hospital. The Defence Medical Services were awarded the freedom of the town, which was ever so nice.
That's really nice. Yeah,
a lovely gesture. It was lovely to see the family and friends of staff there. But to answer your question about rehab, yes, Headley Court, which is a very well established facility, transferred to Stamford Hall near Loughborough.
Yeah, why was that? Because Headley Court, I thought, was a terrific place.
Well, it was a landlocked facility that was designed for a completely different purpose, and it wasn't possible to extend the facility.
Oh, I see. It was a planning thing,
any further. And so it was then assisted by a very significant gift from, I think, the Duke of Westminster. Stamford Hall was bought as a dilapidated stately home, I think it's fair to say, Roy, and that's been transformed into the most amazing rehabilitation centre. And if colleagues aren't familiar with it, then do please Google, or if use any other search engines are available, but do search Stamford Hall, and it's the Defence Medical Rehab Centre, where we have some of the best expertise in the world to help rehabilitate some of the most seriously injured serving personnel.
Are all the personnel that work there, the clinical medical work personnel, are they all in the military?
Most of them are. There are some non-military people, Roy, and we've got a very exciting development that is being taken forward by the NHS in developing a national rehab centre, as it's called, the NRC, in the same campus as Stamford Hall. And there are some really exciting opportunities of military staff getting some NHS experience and vice versa.
Yeah.
And that's essentially to look at a proof of concept to see if that sort of model might then be suitable for the rest of the country. But it's a really exciting and important development to
really interesting.
develop rehab.
I'm just going to read a question in. Martin Bradley. Good evening, Martin. Thank you for your question. He says, Peter, is there a dilemma in trying to meet the needs of the pandemic when a significant portion of the defence medics are also NHS employees? Actually, I looked it up this afternoon. It's far fewer reservists than I actually thought. But let's answer Martin's question.
Well, what we have, it's a really good question, Martin, and we studiously avoided removing MOD or Defence Medical Services staff from, for example, the hospitals, unless there was a very, very good reason for doing that. So we recognise that most usually the primary role would be within the hospitals, but we did deploy very, very many of our clinical colleagues from Defence Medical Services that are working in primary care, mental health services and elsewhere to other parts of the NHS, which is why we're left with our equivalent of the NHS backlog, i.e. there's a significant amount of work which we've had to slow down or stop, which we're now having to recover because the people who would have provided vaccinations, audiology tests, dental tests, and so on and so forth were actually serving in the NHS. So you're right, Martin. We tried studiously to avoid creating that conflict because we realised there was no point in robbing Peter to pay Paul, if you see what I mean.
It's interesting. Dillis Quinlan, good evening, Dillis. She says, out of interest, Peter, do you have non-executives on your board? I don't know, do you?
We
got politicians, haven't you?
Well, we have Secretary of State, just like Health. Defence Medical Services is part of one of 4 national commands: the Army, Air Force, Royal Navy, and Strategic Command. So Defence Medical Services is within Strategic Command, and Strategic Command has a set of non-execs who are really, really impressive. And we benefit from input from the non-execs. So, for example, our Quality Assurance Committee is chaired by Ian Smith, a one-time chair of King's College London, a fantastic, highly experienced individual. So we have a lot of interface with our strategic commands and non-execs. And similarly, one of the non-execs chairs the Strategic Command's Audit Committee. And I will regularly have dialogue along with our finance colleagues with that senior colleague. I hope that answers the question, Dillis.
I think it's a very good answer. How do you manage training for senior people? Is that all done internally, or do you do it with the NHS? I mean, how do people advance their career through training and things like that? It's
both, Roy.
Do you let them go to conferences on stuff?
Yeah, we do that. We also provide our own conferences because you'll appreciate that there are some types of treatments and care and injuries that are relatively unique to us.
A lot of those will be in the trauma sector, won't it?
Indeed, and similarly, we have a number of our people that will have trained in, for example, Johannesburg and other centres where there's a lot of gunshot wounds and so on and so forth. But to answer your question, the training that Defence Medical Services personnel and others within the 3 services that provide clinical care is really, really good, I think.
I can imagine it is. I remember, I think there was a development out of Afghanistan, wasn't there, about IV fluids. They used to put up a bottle with a line and into a vein, and then somebody discovered some package thing. They just whacked on people's chests.
I think is what you're referring to. Yeah. And it's a really good example of how literally in the heat of battle, innovation will be created very, very quickly. And then that can have an enormous set of benefits, not just across the military internationally, but also across health systems, including the NHS. And Tim Hodgetts, our Surgeon General, as I mentioned, is a fantastic colleague, was personally involved in helping many of those developments, along with his team, of course.
I thought that was extraordinarily impressive. Well, look, we've just got a few minutes left. If you've got a question, now is the time to ask it. Please don't leave without thinking, oh, really, I wish I'd asked that. No question is too stupid, as I've just demonstrated very adequately.
Got Martin Bradley, Roy.
Martin Bradley, I think I did, Martin, did I?
Roy, if I could come back with a further question, if I may.
Yes, please do, Martin. Good evening.
Peter, one of my roles is as honorary colonel of the Northern Ireland Field Hospital, and one of the experiences we have on a regular basis is recruiting, in particular, medics who go through the process of being brought on board and then fail the medical test. And I just wonder, do we do risk management around all of that? Because, we're trying to recruit very scarce professionals with specialist skills. And I do wonder whether or not, we ever really think a little bit more about the type of environment we're going to put them into, and whether or not, if they've had a broken bone, or, I'm exaggerating maybe to make a point, they have problems, they have difficulties in getting through all of this. So any thoughts on that at all, Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. We endeavour, and I'm not saying we always get it right, but we endeavour to give careful thought to the sort of environments that a clinician, whatever their background, might need to serve them. Can I ask, Martin, an email? I can, through, if you don't mind, John, give you my email address, and very happy to have some further, more detailed dialogue, because it sounds like you got some specific examples in mind. I'd be really happy to explore those with you.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Very good, Martin. That was worth the price of a ticket, wasn't it? Well, I think we're probably at pretty much to the end of the time. I just want to read this out, Peter, from Chris Davidson. It says, to spare Peter's blushes. Well, I'm not going to spare your blushes. He says, I just wanted to say how inspirational Peter has been to many in their NHS careers. As a manager early in my career, I remember attending former IHM conferences and hearing Peter speak on many occasions. All professions need role models, champions, and people to look up to. Peter, in my humble opinion, is one such values-driven leader greatly admired across the NHS from both managerial and clinical colleagues. The NHS has been poorer without his presence, but great to hear the impact he's bringing to the Defence Medical Services. There you go, Peter.
Chris, I'm really touched. Thank you. And Dilys, I've just, even with my varifocals, I read your note, and gosh, I do remember the postcard. Thank you.
Best we don't go there, I think. But Peter, listen, it's been extraordinarily interesting. For me, on a personal level, to catch up with you and see you doing well and your family's okay. You're doing a fantastically interesting job, and we're enormously grateful to you for sharing it with us. And it's such an interesting insight. And I think I agree. I think the NHS is poorer for you not being there. I remember you with great affection in what you did in the NHS, and a lot of us do. So we wish you luck with the challenges of the future, and thank you very much for sparing the time to talk to us tonight. Peter Homa, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much all, and Dilys, delighted. We'll be in touch, and it's been an absolute joy, and I wish each of you well, and go boldly, go well. Good night.
Good night, Peter. Thank you very much. John.
So just to thank Peter once again. I told you it was going to be good, didn't I, at the beginning of this? A couple of events, if I could draw your attention to, particularly given Peter is with us. On April the 5th, we have the next in our military special interest group meetings. Do please come along to that. It's brilliantly led at the moment. Our special interest group for the military by Paddy McKillop-Duffy. And we're having all sorts of interesting speakers come along and content being created there. So do please come along for that. And I've put the link for that in the chat. And also, if I could just draw members' attention to our Greener Care Conference 2022, which is taking place on the 30th of March. You would be very, very welcome to attend that as well. There's going to be all kinds of interesting stuff. And I know Roy will agree with me. The next big thing coming along post-workforce, still environmental sustainability, greener care. The heat's been taken off it for obvious reasons because of COVID, but it has absolutely not gone away as a priority for attention. So do please look to get involved with that. Again, I've put the link up in the chat room. But finally from me, thank you so much for joining in this evening. Major thanks to Peter once again. Major thanks to Roy once again. We will see you all on the next one. Thank you very much. Good night.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Good night, everybody. Good night, Peter.
Good night.
Cheers. Thank you.